Hey there, this is Perch. Want to talk about inkers for a little bit. It's funny how you don't miss it until it's gone. It was a Chasing Amy, I think, that basically called inkers tracers. Or was that Mallrats? It was a Kevin Smith film, and you're forgiven if you haven't seen Chasing Amy. A lot of people didn't, but it fit with Kevin Smith's films. It was very much a Kevin Smith movie. But there was a bit of comic culture in there, a bit of geek culture. Of course, Kevin Smith is tightly tapped into that culture, and I think generally a positive force in that culture. I haven't been terribly fond of the comics he's actually written. I think the a number of reasons behind that. But there are just things that he did in those books that I think were trying to be jokey. It kind of fit the time. It's interesting because I think Kevin Smith's comics, particularly around some of the kind of more bodily humor that he used, is really negatively looked at in today. It's seen as being a real kind of black mark in the industry. But at the time it was coming out, you got to keep in mind that this was the same era where we had the Ultimate comic line doing gags, and we had All Star Batman and Robin doing gags, and so there's some legitimate. Nobody says Frank Miller is a crap writer who takes shortcuts, yet take a look at All Star Batman and Robin, and take a look at the writer's notes for that story that were going out to Jim Lee, and it there's some goofy stuff in there, but be that as it may, there's some lines in there that kind of was a joke that has gone around the industry plenty, which is that the inker gets very little respect. The inker is basically the tracer for the real artist, who is the penciler, and the penciler is the star, and the inker is kind of interchangeable. And I think that if you look at comics carefully, if you've read comics through the years, and particularly if you could see an artist whose work can be dramatically changed, like Frank Miller, Klaus Johnson, or like Johnson. I can't say names. I mean, you guys figured this out by now, right? I can't pronounce anything. John Byrne and some of the inkers that would come along for him, Scott Williams for Jim Lee. I mean, just various kind of inkers that were attached to pencilers that are well known, and then you see the inker change. You see the penciler use a different inker or do something different, and how dramatically it actually changes the look and the feel of the story. The inker plays a really huge role, certainly in setting the tone and setting the style, and it's has been given, I'd say, poor treatment over the years. The inker is has not been given the standing that he or she deserves, and we're kind of all realizing that now. I think in there, this was an argument I remember making in the '90s and 2000s, and it was one that never got any traction. And there's a big counter argument, like, well, how many famous inkers do you know? Like, well, I mean, quite a few actually, because these names keep cropping up, and they are legends in their own right. But today, due to a number of things, cost cutting, digital, just people not using penciling and inking in the traditional sense, but actually doing everything tablet first or digital first, you're seeing a lot fewer inkers. You're seeing the artist is one and done, and I think there's a huge impact in quality, just that is very, very noticeable. And a lot of people go, "Hey, what happened? The art looks like garbage now. What happened?" There's some really good, powerful pencilers that Steve McNiven, who did Civil War. You look at some of his other work in other places, and it looks dramatically different. Ariel Rivetti, there I go again. Um, there are lots of artists who you see very, very different style changes when they're now inking their own stuff, or when they have somebody who you don't really know, and you kind of get the feeling that this is somebody who was kind of grabbed last minute. Or you see the effect of just what digital first is doing from a standpoint of content creation. You're seeing a lot more tracing. You're seeing a lot more kind of very awkward positioning and panel layout. And some of that is simply the reality of people drawing entirely digital from the beginning, who may not have the fundamentals down, or maybe used to drawing on pencil and paper, and now they're going to digital. And in many ways, there are lots of tools in digital drawing that speed things up, that help get you going faster. But it's a little bit like Photoshop was when it first came out, where you could tell who was using Photoshop because they would use lens flare and they would use built-in Photoshop filters to do certain effects, and you could see it. There's a time period in the mid 90s, I want to say like 96, 97, where somebody was coloring over Joe Mad's work and they were using like every Photoshop filter in the box was being used in these comics, and it looked terrible. It looked very, very phony, very computer generated, and it took away from Joe Mad's really nice art. This coloring, these techniques that were being used. So a digital is a little bit the same. You definitely can see when somebody is using a digital tool who isn't completely comfortable and fluid with it, or who are using shortcuts in how the art's being made, and the quality is just not there anymore. But you can sum it, a lot of it, up to the inker. The inker is gone, and the inker played a really important role in kind of finalizing, polishing, really creating the crafted bit of art that made the story what it was. And people who are doing it all themselves, it is not the same effect. It's not as good. And but it doesn't seem like we're going back to it anytime soon. There are certainly still inkers in the marketplace in comics. You're seeing more of that used traditionally in indie books. Some of the image titles, some of the creator-owned titles, you're seeing inkers come in and play a really important role there, because they want the quality of the end product to be good. But when you're trying to cut corners, I mean, there's an easy way you can save some cash, because the page rate for pencil plus ink at the big two is cheaper than separate pencil, separate penciler, separate inker, and also you got the logistics of shuttling the work back and forth, and there's some other things. So it's in theory supposed to make things go faster. It's supposed to make things cheaper, but the effect is we've lost some pretty major quality in all this. We've lost some craftsmanship. And so it's to hit F for respect. It is pour a drink for the inker, who is a slowly vanishing part, and not so slowly vanishing part, of comics. But absolutely, it played a major role in making a lot of comics what they are. John Byrne would not have been as successful and who he was had a lot of his early work in X-Men and even Fantastic Four not had a really strong quality partner there working with him and helping complete those books. I'd also argue that you got more output. The schedule delays of having one person do it all are tough. I think if you're a penciler, you could do 2 books a month. I mean, that's kind of a crazy page rate, and there's always been some people who can work faster than others. But if you're trying to avoid burning out, if you're trying to avoid just kind of keeping your head in the zone and being able to produce really good work, having that penciler inker relationship helps, because it takes a lot of the burden away from finishing the page. It means you can rough some things out where you need to. And it also means that you've got more flexibility in your day of kind of what pages and what panels and what things you're drawing. When you have to do it all, it turns into a bit more of a grind, where you've just got to pump out these pages. And you can just see where the quality is at times rushed, or a lot of the time rushed. Another thing the inker would do is keep consistency going. So where a character, and you especially see this with tracing, the body proportions and the way the character is laid out, a penciler would, create these forms and do some nice work there. And the inker at times would help streamline the drawing to keep it consistent from panel to panel. They would insert the little details, whether through shadowing or shading or kind of adjusting the body form or fit, to keep the character looking consistent throughout the entire title. When it's all one person doing it all, those gaps start to emerge, and suddenly a quick, pencil plus ink all in one, you start to treat each panel as separate, and then the character starts looking different from panel to panel or page to page. So there's a lot the inker did. The inker is the unsung hero. Ode to the inker. It's a tragedy that we moved away from that, and hopefully we can get back there, or as creator-owned titles kind of continue to push up, that people remember that a really high quality book is more important than saving some money and having something that's not going to last as long, not going to present the artist's work to their best potential. Anyway, that's the anchor. Who are the anchors you love? Who are the people you remember that are really high on your mind? And are you one of those people who thought the anchor was kind of a waste of time and not useful to the end product? Why? Why? What made you go down that path? Have you changed your mind? I would love to hear from you. Hey, like, subscribe, get notified with that bell. Follow me on social media, Comic Perch. Recommend suggestions and topics. Would love to hear from you. Thanks for listening.